Welcome back to Film Infection, hope you're having a great day. Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings just came out this past weekend, so in this video I'm gonna stop and rank all 25 MCU movies from the worst to the best. Coming in last place is gonna be Thor the Dark World. Everybody puts this movie last when they're ranking the MCU movies, and I don't really have anything special to say about it, but the main things that I take away from this movie when I watch it is it's forgettable, it's boring, and it's generic, okay? And that's pretty much the general consensus around it, and it doesn't have that same pop that the other MCU movies have, so that's why it's coming in last place. Coming in at number 24 is going to be Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Now, I know a lot of people love this movie, but I just think it's so overrated, and it's not very good, okay? I think the plot is horribly strung together, and I think the way that they structured the movie by having like a villain for each act led to a very unsatisfying conclusion at the end of the movie that sort of left me feeling like the story hadn't been concluded yet, even though it was the end of the movie. And also, I feel like James Gunn sort of went a little too far with this movie. I think Kevin Feige might have given him a little too much freedom. And I know I'm a big advocate for directors having more freedom in the Marvel universe, but I think this might be an example where that might have backfired, because I don't think this movie worked at all. Coming in at number 23 is The Incredible Hulk. This movie is bad, okay, but I don't think it is the atrocity that people say it is. Lots of people like to judge this movie on the merits of other MCU movies, but I feel like this movie is a different thing. It feels nothing like an MCU movie, it looks nothing like an MCU movie, and the story doesn't really play out the way any of our MCU origin stories do. And that's why it's so bad, because I think they wanted to be different from Iron Man, but then that didn't work out, so then they just made all the MCU movies like Iron Man. And also, after seeing how good Mark Ruffalo portrays the Hulk, every time I go back and watch this movie, I hate Edward Norton as the character more and more. But otherwise, it's not the atrocity people say it is, but it's definitely not a good movie. Coming in at number 22 is going to be Captain Marvel. I liked this movie actually when it came out, okay? I actually thought it was pretty good. I liked the humor, I love seeing a jump back in the past, I like the origin story aspect of it, I love seeing young Nick Fury and the way he lost his eye. I thought it was a little stupid the way he lost his eye, but it was cool to see just that little touch. But I saw the movie recently, and it doesn't hold up. It's not a very good movie in any way. In fact, I found it very uninspired, and the character of Carol Danvers is probably the worst part of this movie, because she's nothing. Like, there's nothing about her character that is interesting in any way. Number 21, Iron Man 3. By far the worst of the 3 Iron Man movies, okay? I know some people say Iron Man 2 is worse. Iron Man 2 is not worse, okay? It's slightly better. I just think it feels a little more like an MCU movie. This movie feels like it goes completely off track from the rest of the Marvel universe, and there's a whole bunch of things that happen at the end that try to leave you on a cliffhanger, but then they're never addressed. Like Pepper getting superpowers. Like, how does that never come up again? It was very peculiar to me. And I also just thought the movie as a whole was pretty bad, and I thought the part where Iron Man goes into the city and meets the kid, I thought that was all really weird. And I also thought that stupid reveal with the Mandarin was really annoying and completely undercut the first 2 movies. So yeah, this is by far my least favorite Iron Man movie, and probably the worst one. I know some people say, oh, Iron Man 2 had too many plot lines, which is true, but I do find it slightly more interesting and fun to watch than this one. Number 20, Iron Man 2. This movie isn't that much better than the third one, it's just slightly better, okay? But the big problems with this movie is, like I said before, there are way too many plot lines, and the movie cannot decide which one to make the main plot line. And if they would have just deleted some of these plot lines and maybe gone more in depth on Tony's relationship with his father and the arc reactor killing him, this could have probably been one of the better MCU movies, but they decided to go with 1,000 plot lines and make none of them very interesting, leading to the second worst sequel in the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe. Coming in 19th place is going to be Black Widow, and I think this movie was a mistake to make. In my opinion, like I said in my review of this movie, they decided to tell the wrong origin story for Black Widow. They should have told the story of Budapest, but instead they decided to tell a story in the middle of the events of the MCU that we already know happened. happened that were rather insignificant, even if they were being told during Phase 3, but especially since they released it in Phase 4. I had a lot of problems with this movie, but my biggest problem is that it felt like they didn't need to tell this story. Number 18, Thor 1. This movie isn't necessarily bad, but it's just still trying to figure out the character of Thor. They try to go with a different direction in the second movie that really doesn't work, but this movie introduces a Thor that could have gone places, but they decided not to take anywhere. I think this movie mostly just suffers from Phase 1 growing pains, as a lot of people say. It's not a bad movie, it just feels like the contrast between the Asgardian part of the movie and the Earth part of the movie is too great. There isn't really a pathway between the two, and so it feels a little too jarring, and it doesn't really blend well together. Number 17, Avengers Age of Ultron. This movie is by far the worst Avengers movie, and I think it's partially because it has the same problem as Iron Man 2. There's just too much going on, and the movie never stops to really let you take all of it in. And the fact that there's a bunch of stuff going on isn't necessarily the bad thing, right? It's an Avengers movie. There's supposed to be a whole bunch of plot lines converging and being resolved, but they never really stop to let you take in each of them. The movie just keeps going from plot point to plot point to big old MCU action scene to the next action scene to plot point, and there's so much going on, and they never pause. They never really stop to check in with the characters. Even when they do, they just have to invoke some sort of drama. This movie makes you feel exhausted, okay? This is the most exhausting MCU movie out of all of them. Number 16, Antman and The Wasp. A somewhat satisfying follow-up to the first Ant-Man movie. I really love that this movie was sort of just a breather after Infinity War, because so much stuff happened in Infinity War on a larger scale than we've ever seen before in the MCU, and this movie sort of just lets you breathe, gives you some Easter eggs from what might happen in Endgame. This movie does a really good job at just giving you something to laugh at, giving you a fun little heist movie to watch. Now, this movie does have its problems, right? There are way too many plot lines going on. Starting to notice that's a common problem with these MCU movies. But besides those things, I think this movie is really nice. It's a fun little family movie. It's not like the best MCU movie, but it's definitely one of the most rewatchable MCU movies. Number 15, Doctor Strange. Now, don't get mad at me. Some people think this movie is the best of the MCU, and I think it had the potential to be, but I think the Marvel formula sort of ruined it. This movie is the biggest victim of the Marvel movies trying to shove all of their stories into the same template. This movie takes this grand concept that really should be told in a much more extravagant way and tries to shove it into the same template that they used to tell the Iron Man origin story. It doesn't work for me. I know some people think it's a lot better than it actually is, but I don't. I don't think it's that good. Number 14, Ant-Man 1. This movie was a nice little movie. You know, it wasn't great. There are definitely some plot holes. The storyline is a little ridiculous, but I mean, Paul Rudd is just one of the best people ever. I mean, he's so likable, he's hilarious, he does a great superhero, so I'm not complaining. I think Paul Rudd is great in this movie, and I think it's just a nice, delightful movie. Okay, it's not like the best movie, but it's in no way disappointing. It's just reaching for different goals than your Endgames or Infinity Wars. Number 13, Captain America: The First Avenger. This movie is significantly underrated. I think it does a great job at capturing the Captain America origin story from the comics. It's very respectful to that and stuff, but it also does a great job at modernizing it so that it can be told to a 21st century audience, and the movie also matures the origin story from the comic books a little bit. I do understand that there are some problems with it, basically just being a commercial for the Avengers, but putting that aside, I do think it is a great movie and sets up one of the best character arcs in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Number 12, Black Panther. This movie is a little overrated. I don't think it's a bad movie in any way. Some people like to say, oh, this is the most overrated MCU movie. I don't think it's the most overrated. I think a lot of the love it gets is deserved, but the storyline, for me at least, is a little too boring. And it's very predictable, okay? The MCU origin story had been told 6 times already. We don't need to see that again just with a different character. Number 11, Spider-Man: Far From Home. I sort of judge this movie the same way I judge the Ant-Man movies. They're not meant to be taken the most serious, right? They're meant to sort of just be a fun family movie to watch one night. okay? They're not the movies that are reaching for the highest goals. They're not the movies that reach to break box office records. They just reach to be fun and sort of be a breath of fresh air from this MCU story that is very intense and fast moving, and I think these kinds of movies are very necessary. Number 10, Thor Ragnorok. Now, I know people are gonna get mad at me for not putting this one higher, but this movie for me feels a little too loud. I like this movie. It's one of the better MCU movies by far, but it was very loud, and while I do like that they changed the character of Thor, right, from the boring character from the last movie that nobody liked, I do think that they sort of disrespected the Thor franchise a little bit, and they disrespected the Thor from the previous movies, and I don't know, something about that doesn't sit right with me. Even though I didn't really like the old Thor, I just don't like that they pissed all over their old work just so that they can make more money. Number 9, Avengers Infinity War. People like to say this is the best of the MCU movies, and I just have to disagree there, okay? I think there is way too much going on in this movie, and they do a great job at focusing it, right? They basically just turned Thanos into the main character so that they don't have to like try to pick a hero to be the main character, or even worse, try to make them all a main character. They make the villain the main character and then sort of make the heroes, the heroes are still the good guys, right? We're still rooting for them, but they're not the main characters because we already know who all of them are. But that's part of my problem. I don't feel like we're really getting those emotional moments that I would like in an Avengers movie. It feels a little emotionally stale. That's what I want to say. It feels a little emotionally stale. Number 8, Captain America Civil War. This movie is also very frustrating to me, okay? Mostly because the heroes are just too stubborn and nothing is learned in this movie. There really isn't a big message besides you have to stick together. But the reason they're splitting up is actually pretty legit, and they don't teach any lesson on how to overcome adversity even when you have opposing views, okay? The movie never tries to touch on that, right? They end the movie with the heroes split up, and the only reason they get back together at all is because someone's trying to wipe out the entire planet. The only reason this movie is so high on the list is because the fan service is freaking awesome, okay? I love the fan service in this movie. The story is kind of horrible. The heroes learn nothing. Their character arcs just slow to a crawl, and nothing gets done or happens, but the fan service is just, it's awesome, okay? I love seeing the heroes fight each other. I love seeing Black Panther introduced. All this stuff is great, okay? So, while the movie isn't a great movie on its own, the fan service alone is enough to get me excited every time I watch it. Number 7, Spider-Man Homecoming. This is the most fun movie in the MCU, okay? I have the most fun with this movie, but it's also a really good movie. The action and CGI in this movie are top-notch. The emotions are very deep. I loved seeing the MCU through a teenager's eyes for the first time, and that's what really made me love this movie. Number 6, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. This is the latest Marvel movie, and I think it's one of the best ones. And one of my reasons for loving this movie so much is that it just breaks the MCU mold. A lot of these MCU movies, like I said before, just follow the same template. And it seems like in Phase 4, Marvel's gonna try to expand and explore different ways to tell origin stories, and it seems like this movie is sort of kicking that off. Number 5 is gonna be Iron Man. The first movie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe still remains one of the best because this is where they cracked the MCU origin story that we all know and love today. Now, since then, they've sort of driven it into the ground because they've told it way too many times over, but this was the beginning of that, and this is the movie that showed us that there is another way to tell origin stories for superheroes that aren't dark and gritty, but are still serious and can still be taken seriously. Number 4, The Avengers. The first Avengers movie was sort of revolutionary in superhero films because it showed that you can bring a bunch of heroes together and still tell a story that's still cohesive and doesn't have too many things going on. Number 3, Avengers Endgame. A lot of people like to say, well, Endgame isn't as good as you remember it. It is. It was actually about as good as I remember it. It was a really good movie. It was a great finale to the Marvel Cinematic Universe Phase 3, and it completed the best character arc in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, that of Tony Stark and Steve Rogers. It completed 2 of the best character arcs in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. universe. And it does something that I believe Captain America Civil War and some of these other movies fail to do, which is deliver great fan service while also delivering a great story and having those two things tie together. Number 2, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1. Oh my god, this movie is amazing, okay? Now, I don't think this is the best movie, but this is by far my favorite. I have the most fun with this movie. This is probably the most heartwarming movie. Oh my god, I love this movie so much. It has everything that you want out of a superhero film and more, right? It delivers on the action, it delivers on the story, it delivers on the characters. Everything that you want delivered to you, it delivers on. And I really love how, despite the fact that this is a Marvel movie, you can really feel James Gunn's personal touch on this movie, and that's sort of the bow on top of this great superhero piece. But the best MCU movie, in my opinion, is Captain America: The Winter Soldier. This is the first movie that introduces the idea of a secret organization that is sort of manipulating everybody into thinking they're good guys. I love the spy feel of this movie, and I love how it meshes together really well with the superhero element of this movie. I also like that even though this is a Marvel movie, it isn't full of quips that feel out of place for the scene, which was one of my biggest complaints for the latest Shang movie. And I think this movie not only delivers on Captain America at its best, but the MCU at its best. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy the content on this channel, consider subscribing, and I hope to see you back next time I publish a video.